Welcome to my video. I painted this painting last week, Momentum, and I wanted to say a few things about it as a bit of a voiceover. So, to start with, I usually my have my palette all ready to go, and I add my light colors first for my clouds, and I brush them on with my largest brush. It feels really loose and free to me to be able to do that. Especially when I'm doing a demo, I like to work from top to bottom. It shows just a little bit about what it gives you a flow for the painting, and you can follow its progress. And also, that way I can't wipe my hand over top of my wet paint while I'm working. So I just find it works really well for demos this way. I'm using a basic palette. I've got three colors. The whites is titanium white. I'm using a indigo blue. It's actually called indanthrene blue in the colors that I use. I use Liquitex acrylics when I can. The other colors I enjoy using with my skies are cobalt blue and something called brilliant blue. Again, they're all Liquitex colors. I start with my largest brushes first, and I do find that I can do either flat or thins with them. You notice when I pull through the strokes, they blend. I'm working pretty much wet and wet at this point. I spent years working in watercolor, and I find that with skies, particularly keeping the paint wet, you get much more blendability with acrylic. The background is the sky, and then I work down towards the ground strokes. Occasionally I'll use a small brush, just wanted to see what this would do for me here. I have a range of brushes that I enjoy using. My watercolor brush is what I use for my backgrounds, and that's uh, it was a Winsor Newton brush, and I've also got a Princeton brush. You see that Princeton brush is also a handy brush. The two brushes, one with the darks and one with the lights, especially when I'm doing a demo and I find that time is important. So I like to work with both brushes at the same time. It's important to be able to go back in with additional white as you're working while the canvas is still wet, though you can add it later. One of the things I try and tell myself while I'm painting is to change the angle of my brush. And that's something that I find when you get a really good stroke, put it down once, twice, three times, any more than that, and you get into too many repetitive strokes. So try to change the way you're holding your brush. I've said all I had to say about the sky for the moment, so I'm going to start to go into the body of the painting. This is a visual that I took a photo of on Rizzers Beach, and it was a very windy day. You can almost feel the wind in the brush strokes. As I start to lay in the ground colors, I'm using a flat palette knife. I have gone through several different styles of palette knives, and this one that I started to use was a ceramics tool, and they're stainless steel, and they're wonderful for identifying sharp edges and keeping things looking fresh and uncontrived. So I use the largest ones I can. They're great for putting land masses in. So when you get amount of land that you want to show in the distance, that gives you a nice loose feeling to it. I decided to add a few more lights to the background as I was working on the foreground. As I said, you can always change later, but it's nice to have them in when you're wet on wet, and the blendability is so much better in acrylics if the paint is still wet. Using the angled palette tool. Again, that's a ceramics tool. You can actually get them on Amazon, and you get a set of 10 assorted stainless steel knives for much better pricing than if you were to try and buy palette knives that size. So I really like them. They're flexible, and that seems to suit my brush style quite well, using the palette knives in a flexible manner. I've often gone through an entire painting and realized I've only used my large brush through the painting. It's an interesting idea just to paint a painting with one brush, and I challenge you to try it. It's kind of fun. It's a fun challenge. The other colors that I use with this are burnt umber, Mars black. Sometimes I'll use ivory black. They're they're subtly different. In this case, I used the Mars black. It's a little bit warmer, I find. One of the nice things about black is if you mix it with yellow, it makes these wonderful subtle green shades. And here I'm mixing it with a Naples yellow. It creates this nice mossy tones that you often find at the ocean. I always find it interesting when you're doing a demo, you're trying to focus on what the painting is going to look like to the viewer as you're painting it. So for me to talk while I was painting the picture would be almost impossible. I was listening to another artist the other day who said she has difficulty when she's doing the videos and actually creating a painting without distracting from the video, and vice versa. So I absolutely agree with that. You don't always do your best work when you're doing videotapes, but at least you get to show your work when you're videotaping it. So I think that's a benefit that You sometimes have to give up your own personal feelings about a painting in order to show your technique to someone else. So be it. That's part of the fun of it. There's a couple of other yellows that I like to add when I'm painting foreground rocks. And I usually keep Naples yellow on my palette, sometimes yellow ochre, and a cad yellow middle. Some people call it cad yellow medium. It depends on the brand of paint, I find. One of the nice things about these palette tools is you can scrape with them as well. So you can apply paint and get some really nice fine lines with scraping and with applying the paint to the edge of the tool. One of my other favorite tools to use is a palette knife I found in an art supply store, and it's bent, and it's a Liquitex product, so it's quite a neat knife. You do have to be careful though when you're applying paint with it, because the edges of it are fairly rounded, and sometimes that suits what you're doing, and other times you need a squared off edge. So I do have squared edge bent palette knives as well. I've used a lot of different kinds of tools for painting. There's a few plaster application tools that I like. They're usually very thin. Sometimes they're a flexible plastic. You can pick them up at the hardware stores. If you try and pick up some of the larger metal palette knives at the hardware stores, they're usually too heavy to work with, which is why I started to use these ceramic tools that I bought on Amazon. So I'll put the link in my video at the bottom for some of these tools. Sometimes I'll switch over to a smaller brush. I find with acrylic that one of the things I really enjoy with brushes is when a brush can be used as a very long, they call them, I used to call them flats in some brush companies, and they hold a lot more paint. But what's nice about them is they also do go very flat. So you can draw a fine line with them or a nice boxy shape. And I find that really suits my working style. Before I do a video, I will have my paint mixed in advance. I'll get several different colors and I'll rejuvenate it while I'm working. Now, I work with my paint tubes open. Even though it's acrylic, I take the caps off the tubes and I'll dip the end of the paint tube in water and set it on the counter so that when I have to apply paint to my palette, I can do it quickly without worrying about what's going to having to open a tube. And also, I find that if you do close the lids on your paint, sometimes you hesitate to add more paint while you're working. So it's important to keep the freedom of color choice while you're working with your paint. And in order to do that, keeping the lids off of your tubes is a huge difference. But what about wasting paint, you're thinking? I don't waste paint. I can, because I'm, again, working with Liquitex paints. They have the type of lid that I can actually put paint back into the tube. You just tap it on the counter or burp it a little bit, and the paint will go back into the tube. So I can overfill my palette and put extra paint on, and I can take my hand and wipe that paint off and put it back into the paint tubes. Not many brands of paint will do that. So this is one of the reasons that they've got me as a dedicated Liquitex buyer, is that those tubes are the best and they are so easy to open. I've had some tubes of paint in other brands and really good brands. I won't say their names because I know a lot of people are using a variety of different brands, but where the cap has just solidified on the tube and you've lost half a tube of paint because it's dried out. So I haven't found that with the Liquitex tubes, and hopefully they're still going to keep their lid design consistent, as I've depended on it for over 20 years. As I've been working in acrylics, I really enjoy working with it. One of my favorite palette knives actually has several different sides to it. I can use the long edge or the short edge, depending on how large the shape is that I'm painting. For the purposes of this video, I did just, the one palette knife, but I have used huge paint scraping tools before. I've used a door, what do you call those things you put at the bottom edge of a door? It's a door edge. They have a brush on one side and a flat on the other, and they're about 36 inches long, or 32 depending on your door width. It took me a while to find them, and I saw an artist using them on TV on an art show, and I thought, well, that is really cool. I've got to try that. And I tried it. I've tried it maybe twice. Because what always looks good on TV and looks really, oh, what a neat effect, is not always the easiest thing to do. And I must say, when you're getting used to these palette knives, it might take you a while to get used to them. Don't give up. It took me years to figure out how to use these large, flat palette knives. And in the meantime, I worked with other things that I was more familiar with, like large brushes. So never give up in art anyways. It's all just part of the journey. I do like to put in a little bit of fine lining every once in a while. I usually use a rigger brush. Again, it's a long bristle brush, so you don't have a lot of control, but you can have a lot of fun with it because it really shows. In particular with this beach, Rizzers Beach has some really interesting rocks. They have the neatest fissures. They're glacial rocks, and some of them are just kind of straight up and down. So you're looking at tremendous crevasses where over the years, they've broken apart. It's an amazing, amazing beach to paint. A lot of fun for walking your dogs too. One of the things about Nova Scotia, there's so many great beaches out here. I don't think I could ever get tired of painting beaches, and I don't think I'd ever run out. You can kind of see the composition coming together a bit now. Working back and forth from light to dark. And if you're adding your darks at the end, they do tend to clarify some of the areas of interest. I will say I work with reference photos, but I am not totally committed to the photographic representation of a image. So if I find an area that needs a little bit more, in this case, I actually stopped and went back into the painting to add some more lights because what I had done wasn't really saying as much as I wanted to say. So going back in, this is actually a round brush, and a round brush can be handy. Yes, you can use it as, you know, for rounded areas, waves, but you can also make it paint a really nice flat lines. So there's a lot of versatility to a round. They call these filbert brushes, the round ones. There we go. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing from you.